Hi, my name is Danae. In this video, I'm going to show you how to hand quilt your quilt.
Begin by threading your needle. I prefer to use size 6 or 7 embroidery needle for a size 8 pearl cotton thread, or a size 5 or 6 embroidery needle for size 5 pearl cotton thread. For the Frederick quilt, I use size 6 needle with size 8 pearl cotton thread. A single overhand knot is made by looping the tail of the thread over and through itself once. A double overhand knot is made by looping the tail of the thread over and through itself twice. You can quickly make a knot by wrapping the thread around your pointer finger and rolling it with your thumb. Roll it once for a single overhand knot and twice for a double overhand knot. Begin by quilting in the middle of your quilt and work your way out towards the edges. Pierce just the quilt top with your needle, about an inch from where you want to begin your stitch. Be sure not to go through the quilt back. Pull your thread through the fabric. Then give a brief yank on the thread to pop the knot through the fabric. Careful not to pull too hard, as your thread may come through the top layer of the quilt. If this should happen, it's no big deal. Just begin again. I like to follow the seam line with a basic running stitch. I create a running stitch by rocking the needle up and down through the quilt layers. Attempt to keep your stitches consistent. However, inconsistency is human and gives the quilt character. Just make sure you're having fun with it. A lot of the hand quilters that I know think I'm absolutely crazy for not using an embroidery hoop whenever I'm hand quilting. I promise you, I tried it and I was not a fan. I much prefer to be able to pinch my quilt from the back to control my stitches. But seriously, don't take my word for it. Give an embroidery hoop a try and make your mind up for yourself. I am fully aware that I am in the minority on this particular subject. When you begin stitching your quilt, you should keep in mind that your stitches need to be no more than 4 inches apart in order to properly secure quilt layers. Anything further apart and your batting may bunch between the layers. When you have only 3 or 4 inches of thread left, pierce your needle through the quilt top layer only and bring it back up about an inch from your stitching. Make a knot in your thread close to the exit from the quilt top. Send your needle back through the same hole that it came up through the fabric. Pull the needle up through the quilt top and pop the knot back through the quilt top. With the thread still pulled a little tight, clip off the tail of the thread. When you release the thread and pull on your quilt top, it should go back into the quilt layers and be hidden. Be sure you do not stitch or knot outside of the yellow dotted line. You don't want to cut your thread when it comes time to trim the edges of your quilt for the binding. Next, I'd like to show you how I added plusses to the Frederick quilt. Begin the plus stitches just like a running stitch by making a knot and popping it through the quilt top fabric. Make a single vertical stitch going through the entire quilt sandwich. Then stitch a horizontal stitch, making a plus sign with the stitch. When you go back down into the fabric at the end of this stitch, only go through the quilt top layer. Direct your needle so that it emerges where you want your next plus stitch. By doing so, you will not see the long, unsightly stitch on the back of your quilt. Finish your plus stitches just as you would any other running stitch, by pulling the needle through, making a knot, and then sending it back through where your needle had originally emerged. I absolutely love hand quilting. It gives me complete artistic freedom. I often use the edge of my quilt top seams to guide many of my quilting stitches. When I quilt without using the seam edges as a guide, I like to use washable pencil to mark my quilting stitches ahead of time. Using a ruler and a water-soluble pencil, mark the width you'd like for your quilt stitches. Then mark the line you want to follow with your quilt stitches. For the Nellie quilt, I marked a straight line through the middle of the small diamonds, and then measured an equal distance between the penciled lines for the other stitch lines. The spacing of the lines are about 1 1/8 inch apart. For the Nellie quilt, I used a thicker size 5 pearl cotton thread in 5 different colors to give my hand quilting even more of a pop. Quilt with a running stitch just as previously instructed. When your quilt has been bound and completed, you can wash your quilt to remove any of the pencil markings. When you have finished quilting your quilt sandwich, you're ready to begin binding your quilt. You can watch a tutorial on quilt binding by going to fold&sew.com.
Thank you so much for watching this hand quilting tutorial. If you'd like to watch more quilting tutorials, you can visit fold&sew.com.